Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Skipton, or North Yorkshire Council's Skipton and Ripon Area Planning Committee, which has been held in the Council Chamber in Pateley Bridge for what I think is the first time today. So thank you very much for our hosts. Hopefully it won't be the last time we're here. It'd be nice to come back again as soon as we can. My name is Councillor Nathan Hull. I'll be the chair of this committee today, and the vice chair is Councillor Andy Brown. Could I remind everybody that today's meeting is being audio recorded and will be made publicly available in the next few days on North Yorkshire Council's website if anyone wants to listen to it. Recording is allowed at council committee meetings. I've not been notified that anyone has contacted Democratic Services saying that they wish to record the meeting today, but if anybody is in here who is going to make any recordings, could they please just make themselves known so we know who they are. Okay, sorry, so you are?
John Plummer from Strawberry.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of housekeeping, could I remind everybody to keep their mobile phones switched off or on silent? I've not been made aware that there's going to be a fire test today, so if the fire alarm does go off, I'd ask you all to exit via the nearest exit, which is over there, and to congregate in the Nidderdale Museum car park, which is round the back. The officers in attendance today to support the meeting are Stuart Mills, who's a development management team manager, Andrew Hoff, who's a case officer for item 4, Glenn Sharp, who's solicitor, and Vicky Davies from Democratic Services. So if I could move to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Vicky, do we have any apologies today?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillors Barbara Brodigan and Andrew Williams.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So turning to agenda item 2, minutes from the meeting held on Tuesday the 4th of February, of which are found on pages 3 to 8 of the agenda. I'd also just point out that Democratic Services have made a slight amendment to the resolution of minute 141. And the permission is also subject to prior completion of a section 106 agreement with terms as detailed in paragraph 1055 of the report. Does anyone have any further amendments in terms of the minutes, or is everybody happy with the minutes? Okay. So, moved and seconded. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, we move on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Anyone have any declarations of interest?
Okay. Chairman.
So, I have a declaration in that I know the applicant personally, and advice of legal services. I will not be taking care of agenda item 4. I'll be handing over to the Deputy Chair, Councillor Andy Brown, to take us through this application. So, if there's nothing else, I'll hand over to Councillor Brown. Have you got that?
No, can you leave that? Oh, well, we can have this one.
I've got it on the screen.
Have you got it on the screen?
Yeah, on the screen.
You sure you don't have that?
Yeah, that's maybe not. Oh my God! You should get illusions and grandeur in here. Not easy to sit and see. We'll replace the hot seat. Okay. Anybody want to declare lobbying at all?
Don Chairman.
Yes, again,
Yeah.
against. Yeah.
And I'll declare I've been lobbied. Okay. Where are we? Okay, so this one's for the variation and deletion of conditions and the amendment of proposals of phase 2 of the development. Members will recall that this application was deferred pending receipt of an energy statement and a financial viability assessment, both of which have now been received. So I think we can go to the case officer to take us through a presentation, which is Andrew off.
Thank you, Chairman. I should just wait for Vicky just to get into position to control the slides for me. So as we've just heard from the Chairman, this application was presented to Planning Committee in September for deferred consideration for further information in respect of a financial viability assessment and a energy statement, both of which have now been received and are referred to within the text of the report. Move to the next slide, please, Vicky. Glasshouses Mill is located in the village of Glasshouses towards the southern end of the village. Glasshouses is a service village as identified within the slide that you're looking at now. This is an extract from the local plan. The red line boundary shows the extent of the development limit for the village, and the site, which is located towards the southern edge of the village, immediately to the north of the river, entirely within the development limit for the settlement. The site itself is located within the National Landscape or Nidderdale Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, and also wholly within the Glasshouses Conservation Area, as indicated by the plan. If you move to the next slide, please. This plan shows the buildings of local interest, and the red buildings, the main Glasshouses Mill building, local landmark buildings, which are now listed structures. Next slide, please. This is an extract, an overhead extract showing the application site. The main mill building is the large building in the centre of the photograph in the U shape, and that forms part of phase 1 of the development. Phase 2 is to the north and east of that particular building. That includes the warehouse building to the north, stables to the immediate east of the warehouse building, a new build development running perpendicular to the eastern wing of the main mill building down towards the river itself. Next slide, please, Vicky. So this shows it in plan form. The warehouse building to the north is grade 2 listed, as are the stables immediately adjacent. To the south of the stables is the barn building, which has consent to be converted into offices. That remains as part of the original approval. And the new build element is located to the immediate west of the barn building, running in the north-south direction, perpendicular to the eastern wing of the main building. Proposed to convert the warehouses into residential, 6 units, the stables into 2 residential units, and then the remaining units are in the new build block as referenced within the report. It's also proposed to regularise the works which are being carried out to the external features of phase 1. Again, they're referenced in the report in terms of the detail of what's been carried out. Phase 1 has been virtually completed now, albeit some of the external works have not been in accordance with the previous approved details. These are amended as part of the proposal and are under consideration as part of this scheme. Next slide, please, Vicky. So this is the warehouse building. This is to be converted into 6 2-bed units. You can see the elevations there of the proposed developments, a sympathetic conversion. This building has already had listed building consent to be converted in the manner as indicated on the slides today. Next slide, please, Vicky. So that shows the floor plan spread over 2 floors, 2-bedroom accommodation, full height towards the front of the building. Next slide, please. And these are the photographs of the existing warehouse building. This is the frontage elevation, the main elevation. Next slide, please. Another one showing the existing roller shutter door. The next slide, please. That's the rear elevation of the warehouse building and the existing route of a public right-of-way which runs immediately to the rear of the site. The area to the right-hand side of the slide will be converted into garden area and parking as part of the scheme. Next slide, please. This is again a distance view of the rear elevation. Public footpath is located behind the single-storey building and the wall with the yellow, I can't tell you what flower it is, but behind that there's a public right-of-way which runs to the rear of the existing buildings, which is intended to be diverted as part of the scheme. Next slide, please. This is the stable block as part of the original enabling consent for this site. This was to form office units. It's now proposed to form two bedroom units with 4 parking spaces indicated to the bottom left-hand corner of the slide. Next slide, please. So these are single-storey, front, rear and side elevation. You saw the photograph, the rear elevation where the public right-of-way goes. Next slide, please. These are photographs showing the current state of repair of the building. So we're looking at it's a U-shaped building, single-storey. We're looking into the courtyard. Next slide, please. That's the front elevation of the previous slide, which you saw the rear of. Again, just to show you the current state. Stone built with a slate roof. Next slide, please. This moves on to the new build element of the scheme. The original enabling consent was always going to have a new build element. This is increased in terms of accommodation. It's provided immediately opposite the pub, mill, mechanics store and the eastern elevation of the main mill building, running parallel to that down towards the river. For those who have not been on site, the site slopes up from south to north from the river up towards the warehouse building. Next slide, please. So elevationally, we have a building which is of industrial character. We've been keen to avoid any domesticity, easy for me to say, of the buildings to replicate the listed structure and the character and setting of the formal development of the mill site itself. Next slide, please. These are the gable elevations which face onto the river. So we have the existing mill and the proposed elevation of the new build element. So we're not dominating the new building. It's similar scale, similar size, similar height to that structure. Next slide, please. So that's looking south towards the river. We've got the main mill building and the pug mill building, which is being converted. This is an old picture slide with the fencing, which is to be replaced or lowered and then stained a different colour. The new build element is located on the left-hand side of the slide, on the opposite side of the roadway. Next slide, please. That's the proper position where the new build element will be constructed. That's the barn structure, which is to be converted into offices, which you just see top left-hand corner. Next slide, please. This slide shows the route diversion of the public right-of-way, which I mentioned in earlier discussion, which currently runs around the back of the stable block. It's indicated. I'm struggling to see what colour it is on that slide. I think it's a blue. Yes, please, Chris.
That's a stable block, and that's the footpath currently.
And it will be diverted down south between the warehouse and stable block down towards the well, it can either go two ways. You can either go through the main entrance to the mill, or the linking to the southern footpath, which runs across the frontage of the mill along the riverside frontage. Thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. So these are some photographs, general photographs of the mill. This is actually the entrance to the footpath, which we've just been referring to from Haregill Close, where you drop down some steps. Point here, they are going down steps to the footpath rather than a ramp. Next slide, please. That's the existing courtyard of the main mill. I wasn't expecting that slide. Excuse me, that one snuck in. That's the main mill building and the main courtyard with parking area to the frontage. Next slide, please. That's the former chimney and garden area. There's a large chimney associated with the mill, centrally located within the site, and that's the as-built development. Next slide, please. This is the parking area to the southern boundary of the site, where there's a clear variance of what's been carried out in terms of the previous consented scheme, which had stone retaining walls. We've got timber retaining walls here. Next slide, please. And again, this is at the southern boundary, looking along the southern elevation of the mill, with the river to the right of this. There was, you can see there's stone, gravel used as a surface material along the route of the footpath. Again, that's a variation to what was originally submitted as part of the enabling consent. Point to make here is that the Conservation Design Team, Heritage Unit, have been out and are happy with the alterations, although there is concern expressed by the Public Right-of-Way Officer regarding use of materials and like something more permanent or more solid, shall we say, than the gravel. Next slide, please. That's a better photograph of what I've just been waffling on about, showing again the gravel and the route of the public right-of-way alongside the adjacent to the riverside frontage, and the boundary treatment of the low Neela fence and the extensive planting beyond that to prevent overspilling into the river itself. The public footpath officer makes reference to the width of the path, and that's the width between the main mill building and the riverside frontage. It shows approximately 1.5 metres wide on the plan. Next slide, please. This is the wheelhouse, and again as a consequence of ground levels and services, this is the difference here. We've created a patio area rather than a communal area which was previously shown, and we approved plans, feel it's appropriate for the locality. The next slide, please, is the end. There's a couple of items just to update members on. I have received one letter from Glasshouses Mill Owners Association to the developer, highlighting concern regarding outstanding matters relating to the phase 1 features of the development and unfinished work as part of that. The applicants have responded directly, identifying how each of those areas are to be addressed either through the planning application or through works when they return to site to complete or start phase 2 development. There is also an update to the report itself. That's an amendment to paragraph 10.47 in the report, which is relating to highway safety and parking numbers. There's a reference there to 95 parking spaces being provided. Amended plans have been provided, and now that figure is incorrect. It actually should read 103, so it's actually an increase in parking provision over what was the original submission. And whilst I haven't had the Highway Authority's comments back on the revised proposal, which is disappointing, but I've tried to chase them, the increase in parking provision does meet the 2015 parking requirements. So there was previously a shortfall, we're now in excess of that.
So I think it's 10.74 rather than 10.74.
Is it 10.74?
Yeah, 10.74.
Sorry.
Okay, you done?
Yes, their final updates, the recommendation is to defer to a section, subject to a section 106 agreement to alter the trigger points of the commuted sum payments. The triggers are referred to in the report and subject to the imposition of conditions as highlighted in the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, what we do next is we go to questions from members, and then we'll get speeches from objectors, parish council, division member, applicant agent. So that's the sequence of things. So I'm opening it up now to questions, not debate. I stress questions, not debate. Robert.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to have it absolutely clear, if this application today is successful, how many residential units will that be providing on this site in phase 1 and 2? I've tried to add them up several times and we've never come to the same number.
Can we have clarity on that, please?
Yeah, I think it's referred to actually in the main body of the report itself. There's 32 units in phase 1 and 18 in phase 2 to give a total of 50.
How many?
50.
50.
50.
50?
Yeah.
Just your age, Robert.
Yeah. Does that, apart from some business use?
Yeah, there's commercial use both contained within phase 1 of the development on the lower floor levels of the main mill building on the southern aspect, the area which fronts onto the river, and there's also a commercial development retained as office accommodation in the building known as the barn, which that's not forming part of phase 2, but has a consent under the original enabling permission. This application obviously seeks variation to the original enabling consent, varying the level of accommodation in phase 2.
So how many square feet does that add up to then?
In terms of the
Industrial
use, approximately the barn itself provides 450 square metres. This is very roughly approximately. The barn provides 450 square metres, and the commercial units within the main mill comes in at roughly around 65-70 square metres of space.
Thank you, Chair.
David.
Yes, you mentioned in your report about the conservation officer.
Yeah.
And he's not happy with the gravel path, I think.
The footpath officer.
Yes.
The conservation officer is
Well, the footpath officer. What was he suggesting, or was he not making a suggestion how that should have been dealt with? Because we've got to be careful we don't.
When you're looking at footpaths, you've always got to remember that the construction of a variety of materials. Once we get beyond the main mill, and particularly on the opposite side of the riverbank, the footpath is just one earth. The footpath officer has suggested that it's a permanent structure, i.e., not a loose material along that frontage. So.
But gravel, I should imagine, would drain better than a.
Well, yes, it would. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else? David.
Yeah, you mentioned, I'm a bit confused about the parking. You said it now meets the 2015 requirements. But hasn't there been an increase in units? So I'm not clear that. Do they meet a number satisfied a shorter number of units, and now there are proposed to be more units? So
When the
does
scheme
the
was
parking
originally
not meet it?
when the scheme was originally submitted, that there was indeed a shortfall. Additional spaces were provided. I think the shortfall was 3 spaces, but additional spaces have been provided. And there's flexibility there. I haven't got the slide up, unfortunately, of the location plan, but there's certainly scope to increase further, if required, the amount of parking provision on the site. But it's always been a balance as the parking versus the level of accommodation, because we've been keen to avoid adversely affecting the setting of the listed buildings and the listed structures by creating a sea of car parking area. So the parking spaces which have been provided have been softened by planting within the parking areas and adjacent to the parking areas. And the total now comes in at 103, but additional spaces can be provided if required, but do meet the 2015 interim parking standards of North Yorkshire Council.
Yeah, I'm only asking technically because I imagine a lot of these 2-bed units that might be occupied by 2 people, they might haven't been retired, but only want one car anyway. You say there's scope to increase the parking. Does that mean building? I can't see where there is scope. You talk about building on green space. Where else would you increase?
There's an area behind the barn building and the former Boys Brigade building. Can we just put the slide?
Yeah.
Probably easier just to point to rather than me trying to describe.
And when you do, could you also just give us absolute assurance that the numbers of spaces meet the number of houses now in according to the exact case?
Yes, the parking spaces meet the requirements for the housing provision. Yeah, there's the parking plan. The area to the bottom right hand corner, Chris, do you want to show? Behind the barn, between the Boys Brigade. This is where additional parking spaces were provided.
That's the barn, that's the Boys Brigade, and there's
So there is space within there for additional spaces immediately adjacent to the northern elevation of the barn. But as I said, there's not a requirement to provide the additional spaces, but there is flexibility there for overflow parking if required. But there is sufficient parking provided on that plan to meet the residential requirements and the commercial requirements.
Okay, any more questions, David?
Final question. One of the reasons given for not accepting any proposal for solar panels here is it doesn't have any direct southern aspect. Now, my house doesn't have any direct southern aspect. In fact, it looks very much like this. That's tweaked even to 1 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And I get plenty of sun on my panels. They're on the facing northeast and southwest, actually. You also say another reason why they shouldn't be allowed here is because it brings down it's a historic setting, blah blah blah. But there's plenty of southern facing roofs for a start that could take solar panels, and I would argue that there's plenty of space for you would get plenty of solar electricity from the other roofs.
Again,
so I don't see that as a valid reason.
It's a balance in terms of the setting of the listed buildings and the impact on the national landscape. Yes, there are the southern elevation ones are that unfortunately the roof slopes which face the wider public network and the open countryside beyond. So any users of the public footpath network would see the solar panels on the grade 2 listed structures. So it's prominently sited at the southern end of the village. The roof slopes which do face south are prominently sited within the village, the listed buildings and the wider landscape setting. So again, it's a balanced judgment that I'm making here in terms of the integrity of the listed buildings, which form an important feature, the setting of the village within the national landscape, against the the impact of solar panels going on those roofs. There are other methods which the applicants are proposing, and they're referenced in the report, which help aid the energy hierarchy in the assessment.
And yet there'll be a massive increase in parking spaces around this mill. Audis, Volvos, Mercedes, Aston Martins, all the rest of it, but you don't think they'll be upsetting the historic setting of this mill?
Can I hold both of you? I think that's for
Is that
debate
debate?
rather than
Okay.
for questions. I'm going to go to my questions. If you've got
Yeah.
them. I've got 4 questions to explore. First is about the culvert and flood defences, and I'm just following up on lobbying we've had around this issue to make sure that the answers are legitimate. There was concern about the flooding of the culvert that failed in October 2023. Can we at this stage legitimately place any conditions to prevent that repeat flooding, or is that not a consideration for today?
It's not a consideration for today as far as I'm concerned. We do have drainage conditions on it. I think that the flood event of 2023 was, I think, probably a question maybe for the applicant. Better.
Well, it's not, there's no more questions for the applicant. They can deal with it in their presentation if they like. So, okay, so you can. I think I'll deal with that in debate because it's important that's covered by the conditions we put on if we can do. And there was also concern about the flood defences by the riverside entrance. Is that covered by condition 18 and 19?
It is covered by condition, yes, and it's a requirement for implementation when works are commenced on that element of the scheme.
Okay, so the condition 18 and 19 should hopefully cover those 2 areas. There was also some concern about the car parking different to things we've heard. One of the things residents asked about was whether there'd be any loss of the 23 temporary spaces during the construction work. Does condition 14 make us secure that residents wouldn't lose access to the parking spaces they need during the construction work?
Condition 14 does require parking provision for operatives of the construction firm to work on the site, which will be submitted to ourselves.
So that doesn't cover the residents to keep their spaces, or does it?
Well,
or is there a condition that does that? So
yeah, the condition can be seen one or 2 ways there, because we would only approve it if there was sufficient parking for residents or accommodation for parking for residents retained as part of the scheme. But we're primarily looking at the parking for the construction traffic.
But I think what I'm trying to hear is a guarantee to residents that they'll still be able to access those parking spaces during construction, and you'd regard it as an enforcement issue if they didn't have that access.
I'm looking at condition 10, which is that said that no dwelling should be occupied until the related parking facilities have been constructed in accordance with the approved drawing. Once created, these parking areas should be maintained clear of any obstruction and retained for their intended purpose at all times.
The question is about the existing parking spaces and the temporary ones that exist and their security during the construction work, as I understand it. I'm trying to make sure that the residents are not disadvantaged, the existing residents are not disadvantaged during the construction phase. Can we look at the conditions and make sure those conditions cover the rights of existing residents to be able to park?
Yeah, I think with the wording of condition 14, it gives us that flexibility to ensure that existing parking spaces are retained and we're not using those parking spaces for the construction traffic.
Okay, that gives me some small reassurance. I'll come back perhaps in debate to the issue of the energy statement. Viability. We have this statement that whilst the scheme is viable and would qualify to provide an element of affordable housing, it's been demonstrated there's no scope to provide any affordable units or make any financial contribution. What options were looked at? Because obviously the Harrogate policy is for 40%, and I think the case is made by the numbers that 40% is not achievable. but the recommendation is 0%. Were there any options looked at between 40% and 0? Because it seemed to me to be a lot of numbers between the two, and I'm not sure I've got the reassurance we sought at the last meeting that that it was only viable to build it with 0.
The viability assessment looked at the two scenarios: phase 1, phase 2, and the site as a whole. There's never been the original enabling consent. There was never a requirement to provide any affordable units on this development. This phase 2 increases the number of residential units on the site itself. The viability assessment demonstrates that the scheme as a whole only just falls within the viability requirements in terms of percentage profit. So that's what's being looked at. Any additional units, I think, would be potentially looking at an unviable development, but that's just my interpretation of the assessment that's been provided.
I just want to be crystal clear in my understanding. Normally, am I right that normally when a scheme is judged to be viable inside the terms of the Harrogate local plan, it will be required to produce 40% affordable and was assessed on that basis? Are we saying here that it's been assessed and that I want to be clear that the options were looked at between 40% and 0%. You know, for instance, one affordable, 2 affordables are still usable, even if it's not 40%.
In the 2020 local plan, it's actually 40% affordable housing on qualifying greenfield developments. It's 30% in brownfield.
Okay.
But the consent I think we're looking at varying is pre-2020, isn't it? When things were slightly different, but at that point the consent was granted then didn't have any affordable housing provision with it, because the viability assessment, work done at that time has shown that it wasn't viable to provide affordable housing then, and it's still the case now.
The reason I'm pressing so hard is because this is a scheme that includes a significant amount of new build and is significantly different, and the viability assessment seems to have come back saying it was in the margins, and I don't understand why it went from 30% to 0 as opposed to an assessment of the possible variations such as 5%, 10%. Don't think I'm hearing them. I'll wait for debate. Okay, so let's go to the speakers. We've got the first speaker, I think, is Andy Totten from Glasshouses Mill Owners Association. And yeah, I suggest perhaps you go to the end there, and you will be timed, and hopefully we'll warn you as 10 seconds to go.
Thank you. Just before I start, it might well be some of the comments I made might have been addressed by the discussions you've had. I will not modify my comments because I've got them ready to give to you.
Of course.
If you feel they have been addressed, fine. Okay, Mr. Deputy Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to express our concerns about the planning application on behalf of 31 of the 32 owners who have chosen to make Glasshouses Mill their home. Councillors will be aware of our concerns about this application from our numerous contributions to the planning process via email, letter, comments on the planning portal. This process has been progressing slowly for a number of years, and it is in no one's interest to prevent progress on the development, which is our home and will provide much needed S106 money for the community. We recognise that some of our issues with the development will not be resolved through the planning process, and we continue to hope that our discussions with the developer and other bodies will lead to a satisfactory compromise on these problems. However, we must highlight some of those areas which were agreed in the original plans and have yet to be implemented. Based on the report by the planning officer, the application before you seeks to accept that phase 1 development is substantially complete. In our opinion, this is not the case, and we need to highlight the critical areas to you again so that conditions on any acceptance can be applied if necessary. First issue is the culvert. As you mentioned, in October 2023, following heavy rain, the original culvert taking water from Glasshouses village, which runs through the mill site, failed, causing flooding. The repair bill for £30,000 has been covered by leaseholders' insurance with a corresponding increase in insurance premiums. The plans highlighted that the existing culvert was inadequate and therefore a new culvert would be installed. Currently there appears to be no plans for this to happen. Second issue is car parking, which you again touched on. The plans for Phase 1 required extra car parking to be available for residents and visitors behind the workshop area when the existing space becomes the Phase 2 building site. Once Phase 2 work starts, the 23 current temporary places will not be accessible safely. This will result in residents and visitors finding alternative space on the already congested public highway in Glasshouses. The extra parking has not yet been planned. Thirdly, the flood defences. The original plans called for flood defences to be in place on the riverside entrance doors before any property in Phase 1 is occupied. There are 32 properties currently occupied and no flood defences. And finally, the lower riverside car park, which you saw in some of the photographs. The plan calls for this area to be block paved or tarmac. This has not been done, causing the loose gravel installed to be washed away by surface water coming down the road from Glasshouses village. The proposal before you requests that you accept the as-built status, which means that unless conditions are applied to any approval, these breaches of the original plans will be unresolved. The cost and responsibility for these unfinished items would therefore fall on the residents. Our request of the committee is that such conditions be applied with a clear time frame to establish a plan to resolve them before Phase 2 begins. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman.
Thank you. That takes us, I think, to Parish Council and Chris Thompson from High and Low, Bishopdale, Pateley Town.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Again, I'm reading a statement that has been agreed at an extraordinary meeting of the Council last Tuesday.
Thank you.
At an extraordinary meeting of Pateley Town Council on 25th of March 2025, it was resolved that the following statement be made with respect to this application. Pateley Town Council welcomes the statement made at our last general meeting held on the 4th of March 2025, when a representative of the developer in his capacity as director publicly gave verbal assurances, recorded in our minutes, that the S106 monies for education will be made as soon as works on Phase 2 commence. In his words, as soon as the spades hit the ground. However, we are very concerned to learn that this is at odds with the planning officer's notes regarding the triggers for this S106 money. We understand from our North Yorkshire Council member that it is his understanding that these S106 monies will be made available in full to Glasshouses Community Primary School, something Pateley Town Council welcomes. We also welcome the developer's representative's declaration that further S106/SIL monies will be paid when Unit 11 or 12 of Phase 2 is occupied. Pateley Town Council's well-documented displeasure at the failure of the developer to pay any of the S106 instalments in Phase 1 is a matter of public record, and was one of the main objections we had the last time this application came before this planning committee. Based on these minuted assurances we have now received, and in the reasonable expectation that North Yorkshire Council will use all means at their disposal to enforce payment in the event that these new trigger points are again missed as they were in Phase 1, we withdraw our objection on those grounds. But we do feel that any further delay in paying S106 money should attract interest penalties, if possible. Our other objection to this application when it last came before this planning committee was with respect to the concerns of our parishioners resident in Glasshouses Mill regarding material disparity between the amenities they were led to expect from the original planning application and the as-built proposal of this application. We do believe it to be in the interest of our parishioners, both mill residents and the wider surrounding community, that Phase 2 of this development goes ahead at pace. We therefore would like to see today's meeting result in the appropriate permission being granted for Phase 2. However, we do want to see that permission subject to reasonable conditions that allow redress of any outstanding material concerns our mill resident parishioners still have regarding this application's proposals for the completion of Phase 1. In addition, we're very concerned about the possible removal of the requirement for the shop and cafe. Paisley Bridge Town Council would very much like to see both developed, possibly as community assets, and feel that 1 year before removing this requirement is too short. Paisley Bridge Town Council would like to see that the requirement for the shop and cafe can only be removed when Phase 2 is complete and fully occupied and after appropriate marketing and promotion. In conclusion, Paisley Bridge Town Council no longer opposes this application, but we do want to see permission granted subject to the conditions that allow the residents of Glasshouses Mill to have remedy for any remaining material concerns they may have with respect to the now proposed as-built finish to Phase 1. For the avoidance of doubt, Paisley Bridge Town Council wants planning permission to be granted for Phase 2 to commence without further delay. Thank you, Mr Deputy Chair.
Thank you. I think that takes us to Divisional Member, Councillor Andrew Murdo.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So you'll have understood, councillors, that everybody wants this Phase 2 to go ahead. It would be disastrous, I think, for the developers, for the residents, for the community, for it not to go ahead. The developers would be left with a financial difficulty, and the residents would be left living on a building site. But there are also some problems, and I think these can be resolved through some conditions that, with respect, I might ask the members of the committee to consider. The first is parking during the development phase. You've seen very clearly that there's a space behind the warehouse, which is allocated to parking in the fullness of time. And what we would say is that if a condition could be made that this could be the first thing that's done, then that would provide adequate parking so that when the development starts, or with all the construction traffic and parking for those working on the development are in place, then that would alleviate any parking problems that the residents would have. So that the first shovel that hits the ground is the shovel that starts to develop that parking space would be a good thing. The second thing is this culvert. It doesn't just drain glass houses, as you know. It comes from a good mile away up in the hills, and it carries a lot of water. In fact, in one of the sheds you can see the flow of water through it because it's not covered. And of course you've heard that there was a burst of that in 2023. And in Phase 1, there was a part of Phase 1 was to reconstruct that culvert through the site. And the problem will exist that if it bursts again, God forbid, but if it does burst again, then the ownership will be very difficult because it'll be riparian ownership of the people that live over that culvert. And so the cost of repair and replacement would I guess, lay on them. And it was a part of the Phase 1 to reconstruct that culvert. And then the last 2 points are the flood defences that were also in phase 1 that are committed to, that should be a commitment. And then finally the pathway, which you've discussed. And the difficulty with the gravel, of course, is that for people with limited accessibility, gravel does create quite a problem. And it was actually going to be block paving, I think, in the original Phase 1, and to restore that would be a good thing. So it would be perfectly feasible, I think, for the planning committee to make these conditions for ease of access. I've just prepared a list of them, and with permission of the deputy chair,
very helpful.
Can
Thank
I
you, Councillor.
pass these over to you? They just set out those 4.
Could you make sure Democratic Services have got a copy?
I've got lots of copies. Anybody here can have a copy.
I would like a copy of those.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that what your
That's
your
my
piece?
that's
Okay.
my statement.
Okay, I'll go to the applicant agent, Graham Holbeck.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Quite a lot to cover there, so I'll race through it if I can. At the last meeting in September, we explained the challenges that the developer had faced in delivering this scheme through what had been a very volatile period for the construction industry. I think it's important to reiterate that the length of the build period, the time over which interest has accrued and the resultant financial challenges have also not been helped by the developer taking on the restoration of the mill as the first part of the project. There was no obligation on them to do it, and this phase of the works has proved to be somewhat of a money pit. It is the main reason the Section 106 payments were not made on time. Nevertheless, the principal listed building has now been completely restored. I think that members who visited the site before the last meeting agreed that this was a development of high quality, and the applicants remain committed to bringing the remaining listed buildings back into use. I'm aware that the property owners have identified some areas of unfinished works around the site. However, these are all relatively minor items in the context of the scheme as a whole, and this is an ongoing development. The applicants have written to the local ward member to explain when the works will be carried out, which relies on the trades being back on site. The reality is that without a viable scheme for phase 2, the next stage of the development cannot be funded and the site is effectively stalled. Hopefully, we do now have a way forward though, with both the reasons for deferral of the previous application having now been addressed. The viability appraisal has been updated and independently certified and confirms that the scheme is only marginally viable after pushing the commuted sums back to the second phase of the works. I think it's important to note that the total contribution has risen from the levels in the current Section 106 agreement to reflect the increased number of units, which is one of the questions raised at the last planning committee. We've also listened to members' concerns over history repeating itself and have offered to bring forward the first payment so that no units will be occupied within phase 2 until it is made. The other reason for deferral requested the submission of a sustainability strategy, which has now been provided. As set out in Andy's report, the applicants have identified the use of ground and air source heat pumps along with fabric efficiencies as the most effective means for improving sustainable performance of the development. As I say, I'm focusing here on the reasons for deferral, as I think it was generally accepted at the last committee that the physical form of development was supportable. Whilst we're not dismissing the ongoing management issues raised by residents, they are not a matter for this planning application and lie with Mulberry as the management company. I'm told that the company has recently brought in an extra resource to improve their service to residents. Just to finish then, look, everybody realises that this project has been far from plain sailing. There does seem to be a general consensus though that the phase 2 works need to get moving in order to address the unfinished items, convert the remaining buildings, complete the access road and realise the Section 106 monies. Hopefully this is what we can all work towards now, not forgetting that this will be a fabulous restoration project when it is all completed. Thank you, Chair. We do hope that with the updated viability appraisal in particular, members are more comfortable now in supporting the officer recommendation for approval. The other piece of positive news just to report is some progress has been made with finding a tenant for the proposed village shop. It's obviously beyond the applicant's control to a degree, but they are working with the council's investment team to try and facilitate occupancy by a local artist to open a small gallery alongside a shop and cafe, which would be a welcome use for this space. I don't know how long I've got left, but I might just race through a few of the questions.
You'll be time. Keep going.
Yeah. Right, parking, first of all, there's a question on parking. Basically, the parking for residents and the protection of their parking is covered under the lease arrangements anyway. I'm told it's a right to park arrangement, so that won't be affected. It might not be in the position it is now, but obviously alternative parking will need to be found. I'd probably just suggest, Andy, a car park phasing plan that we can show where it will be moved as the development progresses, and we'd be happy to accept a condition on that. On the culvert, again, this is not my area of expertise. The developer is here if you want more information, but the bottom section of the culvert was replaced following the recent issues. The top section of the culvert within the site will be replaced with the development works for phase 2 as it falls under the stables block, and the middle section has been assessed. Actually, the engineer's been out there this morning and confirmed that is sound, so just to update you on the culvert. In terms of the viability, just to confirm, David Newham, who was the independent advisor who advised on the viability, he looked at the scheme as presented with 0% affordable housing and found that it was only marginally viable. It was actually below the levels that he would normally expect to see for a viable scheme. That was at 0%, so at 5% or 10% it would only push it further into deficit. I think that was it, unless there was any more.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Before we just debate, I just got one question I wanted to clarify with the officer, which is the payments of the 106 that happen before we start. Are they solely for education? Are they for the community centre? What are they actually for? My reading of it, if I remember right, was each one of them got a partial contribution at stage 1, and then each of them got a partial contribution at the second and the third stage. Is that correct, or is it all going to one at the start?
The way it's set out at the moment is that the whole contribution towards education will be made at the outset, and the open space and village hall contributions will be made prior to the occupation of the 42nd dwelling, so that's prior to the completion of the new build element.
So the 42nd, okay, that's clear. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, members, debate.
Could I just ask a question before you go into debate, Chairman? What protection can be put in place to make sure that the 106 monies are transferred at the end of this development? The education one's going up front, but for the community, how can we protect that?
Well, it would be a legal agreement between the developers and the council that both parties are entering into. We do now have a Section 106 legal officer dedicated to the implementation of Section 106 agreements, which we never had previously. So when we missed the first trip for the first payment of the phase 1, we weren't particularly aware that would be missed. So we're more got mechanisms now in place to ensure that it's monitored and secured as part of a 106 agreement, which we didn't have previously.
Only a little bit late at the end of it, isn't it?
42 rather than 50, David.
Yeah,
so
coming up to the end of it, aren't you?
No, I'm sorry, Agent, that's a bit.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
Other questions or debates? Members, David?
Is there a way, a question for the officer, is there a way that this work of the culvert could be conditioned? Here there's a middle part, there's a top part, there's a bottom part. Some of it is okay, it seems, some of it needs to be done. Is there a way that can be conditioned? Who would inspect that or decide that culvert was
as part of the
before another 1 in 100 years event that happens that we tend to get every 5 years?
Yeah, as part of the condition of consent, condition 21 specifically refers to details of drainage strategy to be submitted and approved in writing. So there is a mechanism there requiring details to be submitted and approved. We will consult the relevant drainage authority, so Yorkshire Water or Ripon Authority, on the details as and when they are received.
So can it be clarified? So you're telling me that the suggested condition from Councillor Andrew Murday about the new culvert would be covered by condition 21, where you would be able to control that and satisfy yourself? So that was now appropriate. Okay. Other questions, contributions? Okay.
Following up on Water Chair, or Vice Chair, the flood defences which the residents are worried about, there were promises of flood defences to be installed, which haven't been apparently. Is that part of the conditions? I can't find it. Is that covered by that?
It's covered by condition 19. Which is a phased development requiring floodgates to be constructed on all apertures where the floor level is below 109 before those uses.
Okay. Thank you.
So again, to clarify, so on what is point 3 on Councillor Murday's suggested conditions, you're telling us that you're confident you can control that by condition 19?
That's
correct. So just going back to this, you talked about following properties occupied in phase 1. Assuming is that phase 2? Did it mean phase 2?
Sorry, you're asking me?
Yes, sorry.
Actually, he's not allowed to ask you. I'm sorry. And can we stick to debate and
just trying to clarify.
Yeah, I understand the reason, but if I allow one, I'll tell you. Okay. Anybody else got points they want to make, or I have a number? David and then David.
Yeah, it's regarding this gravel path. I've seen by what Councillor Murday has put in front of us. This originally was conditioned to be block paving or tarmac. Was it conditioned for that originally? And if so, why are we putting conditions on that aren't adhered to?
It would have formed part of the original development shall be carried out in accordance with the submitted details of the overall development of the site itself, where block paving I think was shown on the southern aspect. That's been gravelled, it hasn't been carried out in accordance with the approved details. Footpath officer wants more of a hard surface rather than the gravel. The gravel is acceptable from a listed building point of view, but the footpath officer would want something more permanent. There is a condition 32, requiring details to be agreed in writing. So it may well be a footpath only needs to be 1 metre wide, but we don't get the whole of that area because it's adding expense onto the scheme. We've heard already that we're close in terms of viability of the scheme itself. But we will require a scheme to be submitted and agreed with ourselves.
But was that not submitted originally?
Well, it was submitted.
You're telling me that it was block paving that was submitted originally.
That's correct.
So why are we allowing developers not to follow the plans that either officers have agreed or members?
And can I just double check on this as well? Are we talking about the same area? You're talking about the footpath, and I think that the councillor and the residents are talking about an area of the car parking which is gravel, and I think that question is what David's asking about. He's not asking about the footpath area, but he's asking about whether the car parking gravel is adequate and whether it should be blocked.
It says that the councillor Murphy told us that it had been washed away. Originally, when it was raised in your presentation, I thought gravel was better than hard surface because of flooding issues. But what we've heard from the local representative and the town council, parish council, that it's the water that's running off and washing that away. So it needs to be addressed as that.
I think it would be open to us, did it not, tell me if I'm wrong, for us to place that condition on that it should be block rather than gravel, and it would be up for you to put that forward if you wish to.
But the question is, Chairman, is that the original plans that were passed were showing block pavement, and according to what's been put in front of us, that has not happened. So why are we allowing that to happen?
I mean, I think just from my point of view, when we debated this the first time, there were a number of things that were meant to have taken place before occupation which hadn't taken place, which is why we are where we are. And then the question for today has to be, do we go forward or do we not go forward, and what conditions do we put on if we're going forward? I don't think we can re-explore the past on it.
I'm sure we've got to go forward with it. But you know, if someone puts plans forward, detailed plans, and it's accepted and approved, who is making sure that those plans are followed? Quite clearly no one at the moment.
Well, if I can just allude to the enforcement officer and the conservation and design officer did go out and see what had been constructed, and considered that what had been constructed on the site was acceptable in terms of the setting of the listed building. Now, as it's transpired, what's been acceptable, i.e. the gravel, there's an issue there that's been of it washing away. There is a condition number 25 which requires details of hard surfacing to be agreed.
So if we condition that today, we've got comfort that that will happen then.
We can look at hard surfacing again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I've got
Thank you, Chairman.
couple myself, and then perhaps looking for propositions and so on. The one I want to ask about is about the heat pump situation, which I've seen in the reports very sensible suggestions that, given the historic nature of the building, and you know, taking David's very good points about potential for solar at various points, that the proposal, the energy assessment, the sustainability statement says that the best option is heat pumps and probably water heat pumps and air heat pumps. Do we have, and there's a talk about an energy statement being submitted, can we rely on, if that energy statement is submitted, there will be heat pumps, or are we dealing with a vague promise that might never materialise?
At condition number 31, there's an energy strategy compliance statement which requires compliance to ensure that what they've suggested has been provided.
Could I therefore ask that you listen to what Councillor Nolan said and what I'm saying about the heat pumps, etc., being a significant factor in it, and that given our council policy on net zero, it would be strange if we agreed to it going forward without those heat pumps in a location where they're obviously going to work. Other comments, propositions, etc., David?
I just wanted to speak in support of Councillor Iton's comments about the path, and I'm concerned that agreements seem to be made about the servicing, and then a couple of officers turn up and go, and now it's okay the way it is. There seem to be two paths through the site. One seems to have steps. Am I right? One has steps?
To gain access to the public footpath behind the stable block, you do have to access it by steps, yes.
Is it possible to get through the site avoiding those steps? Is the other route non-steps?
The other route is...
I think it sweeps down to the...
I think the Riverside route is non-step.
Is that right? And the steps are only on one of those routes?
The steps are on the route, the northern routes, shall we say, I suppose.
Right. So I'm concerned about accessibility. I'm concerned also about Councillor Iton mentioned that the gravel is porous. Perhaps there's less of a flooding issue with gravel, but to people who are less mobile, but maybe somebody wheeling through a wheelchair or pushing, it's harder to push those on gravel. So that condition was originally agreed that it would be some harder surfacing. It might only be a metre wide. I don't know how easy that would be to do with a tarmac, which is not the prettiest, but I'm just thinking of a condition was originally implemented and agreed, and then, as Councillor Iton says, well, it's then dropped. I'm concerned that these footpaths are accessible and there is an accessible route through.
It wasn't dropped by ourselves. It wasn't built out in the plans with the plans by the developer.
Well, okay. But there was a condition there, and then some officers came through going, well, it kind of fits the setting, and maybe they don't have to do that.
There is a condition from the 32.
So I'd like to back Councillor Iton's comments that we somehow is conditioned that there is a hard surface path rather than gravel on that section.
Okay, when we come to proposition, we can go back there, can't we, Robert?
Are we ready for debate yet?
We are on debate.
We're in debate.
Right.
Sorry, I should have clarified.
Could I have a point of clarification? What's the quorum number for this meeting?
3.
Pardon?
3.
Right, well, I might have to leave for too long too much, so you'll still be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we just...
In fact, you'll say you'll be better without me. So if you're ready, I'm ready to contribute anytime.
Yeah, do contribute.
Pardon?
Do contribute if you want. Yeah. Is that...
Ready when you are, Robert.
Right. Won't take long. I'll try not to be controversial, but by God, it's asking a lot on this application. It really does beg a belief, Chairman, that a development of this very substantial scale comprises 50 residential units, an industrial area of some, I think it was confirmed, 6,500 square metres, cannot provide any affordable houses. If you multiply the value of these good people's dwellings up by 50, you come out at a very substantial sum. The Section 106 monies come to nothing more than one 3-bedroom tourist mill worker's house in Skipton. And I think that's a very small contribution towards society, very small. It appears that local democracy in development control has been abandoned by the new government's planning policy. Indeed, planning committee members like ourselves, our local influence is now part of history. Will be looked upon, I suppose, very shortly as planning dinosaurs. Maybe developers will be having parties over that. On viability, my late father, God bless his dad, the old adage was with Dad that you can make figures say anything. And the number of planning applications, substantial planning applications, that have been passed without affordable housing, there must have been significant profits for somebody, but there was no social or housing benefit whatsoever. The Parish Council and the Residents Group Chairman have made more than reasonable requests. The Parish Council say this application needs to proceed for various reasons, if nothing to get a tidy locality for the 30 residents that already live there. The residents group themselves, well, we've been living in a builder's site for long enough, haven't we? It's understandable that reasonable conditions that you've mentioned must be conditioned, soundly conditioned and monitored. I'd have a permanent drone above that site. The local member speaks eloquently as ever that the wish of the parish of Bailey Bridge would prefer it to be proceeded with. The bottom line is 30 of the 50 units are already occupied. We can't undo that situation. But it would stick in my throat to move approval on this application. Perhaps it ought to go that way, but I won't be the one that moves approval, and I will not vote in favour of it. I just have a feeling I've been conned all the way down the line.
I'll let Gail go, then I'd like to have a say.
Yeah. Providing we get the conditions and we make sure that they're adhered to, I will move the recommendation, Chairman, of approval. The residents, the town council wanted approving. They want to go forward with this application. The local county member also supports this, but these conditions must be monitored. I find it disturbing that we can look at detailed plans with the detail of block pavement and yet they take no notice of it. And we must follow whatever is in those plans. So with the conditions that have been suggested, Chairman, especially on that paving, which at the start of the presentation I was in favour of gravel, but I've heard the evidence that that is not working. So.
Yeah, if I may, I'll have my slight bent on it. When I've actually got a lot of sympathy with both the two previous speakers. I think hopefully we've illustrated that we are not prepared to be just rolled over on this, but I think we've pushed it probably as far as we can reasonably push it. There's some major positives of this. 50 new houses, they're a reasonable size, they aren't all huge executive things that are way out of the pocket of local people. The conservation respect looks good, the site's significantly improved. Parish Council sees it as an advantage in balance, and I take that very seriously. And I think there's a general feeling that we're left in a real mess if it doesn't go forward. My concerns are numerous, and pretty much echo Robert and David's, but with a couple of additions. I mean, I was concerned that the energy statement was, I wanted to be confident that was going to result in heat pumps rather than just a nice piece of decoration to get it past the committee. So I'd asked the officer to be very fearsome about that. I was very concerned about affordable, because as Robert said, those figures come in the broad range where something should have been achieved, and we seem to have said, well, nothing can be. But we are in an impossible situation, because if there is a professional assessment that says this can only be afforded if there is zero affordable housing, and that's not been challenged at an earlier stage and proved wrong, I can't say. My gut feeling is it adds up to an awful lot of millions, and there should be room for affordable. We've got to rely on that statement, unfortunately, which is a proof and a matter of fact, and we'd just lose an appeal if we rightly lose an appeal if we ignored it. I'm concerned that phase one was not completed in the way it should have been, as everybody else has been. I'm concerned that reasonable resident concerns still remain significant. I mean, it's reassuring to hear that there might be a tenant for the shop, but it is, kind of there's plenty of slips between cup and lip. And I'm concerned we haven't got a drone that will sit above the site and monitor it the way the residents are entitled to, because that's really what might be required. So I'm going to second the approval, but with a suggestion to the proposer of two conditions. The first is that there is a car park phasing plan to be provided prior to commencement on site, which deals with those issues of how they could make sure they could get access, and I think could be dealt with sensibly by all. So that's a car park phasing plan to be provided prior to commencement on site. The second is that block paving of the parking area to replace the gravel surface should take place prior to the occupation of the site. So it's block paving of the parking area to replace the gravel surface should take place prior to the occupation of the site. Have you got that, Vicky, or is that?
Yeah, car parking phasing plan to be provided prior to completion on site, and block paving of the parking area.
That's Councillor Wright.
Yeah.
Before occupation.
Great.
It does it before occupation.
Before occupation, yeah. Would you find those acceptable?
It's just on the well, I would if the parking is enforceable. Who's going to monitor it? Is it enforceable? Are we putting a condition on that we can't enforce?
I can't see any reason we can't enforce that, can the lawyer?
It's a temporary one, isn't it?
It is. That it meets the tests. It's got to be necessary, enforceable, precise, reasonable.
So it meets the test or not?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
So we have two conditions and a proposal for approval and second. Any more debate? Okay, shall we go to a vote? Those in favour of the application?
Could it be recorded in the minutes that I'm taking no part in the voting thereof?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, do we record you as an abstainer who...
taking no part.
I'll record it as Councillor Hesterton took no part in the voting.
So it's 3 in favour, none against, 1 principled objection. Anything else? Do I hand back the chair to Nathan? Come back, Nathan, always forgiven is all that.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5. Any other items of business? Glenn has something that you'd like to update us on, I think.
There is, Chair. Thank you very much. Slightly unusual, but I would just like to provide a brief update to members for reasons which I'll explain concerning an application which you've already determined, and that application related to residential development at Martin Road, Gargrave. I'm sure you'll recall controversy, I think I could say, there was a certain amount of objection to that application. Just to recap, it came to committee in the first instance in June of last year, where members determined to defer it for some additional information, reassurance basically on highways, impacts and highway safety. The report was brought back to committee in August, and following the presentation of that additional information, members voted to approve the application subject to a Section 106 agreement and conditions in the usual way. Now, subsequent to that meeting, I think it's fair to say that there has been a great deal of objection to the proposal. I'm sure that some members here, I know other members, have been contacted in relation to this matter, as has the Chief Executive, as has the Director, as has the MP. There have been a series of formal complaints through the Council's multi-stage corporate complaints procedure, and so forth. The complainants are a number of individuals and also Gargrave Parish Council. And the basis of the complaint is really twofold, I think it's fair to say. The issue is that the planning policy position which informed the determination of that application started with the lowest tier of the planning policy ladder, if I could put it that way, and that is the Gargrave Neighbourhood Plan. The Gargrave Neighbourhood Plan allocated the site for housing. That was in 2019. Later that year, the Craven District Council local plan also allocated that housing, that site for housing. So there's two tiers of attribution of policy support for the development of that site for housing. It transpires that in relation to the first of those, the Gargrave local plan, there was a discrepancy between the version of the plan which was prepared by the parish council and their planning consultants, which was presented for referendum. It's a multi-stage process with the preparation of a neighbourhood plan. There's a draft, there's consultation, there's an examination, there's then a referendum. If the referendum approves the plan, it can then be formalised, the phrase is made, by the district council, which is what the former Craven District Council did. The issue is that there was a difference between the version which was the subject of the referendum and the version of the plan which was made or adopted by Craven Plan. Specifically, the difference was, although both versions allocate the site for housing, the former, the referendum version, had a number of criteria attached to that allocation, that recommendation, including one relating to the access of the site, and it said that the access should be through the existing road, Walton Road, I think it's called. The proposal which came forward and which was approved by members has a different access arrangement, and what has been suggested to us, the basis of the complaints, the arguments, are that because of this discrepancy in the neighbourhood plan, the council should be precluded from issuing a planning permission, and also that the council, North Yorkshire Council, should correct that issue in the neighbourhood plan. Sorry, Councillor, should I continue, or did you have a question?
Continue, yeah.
On the neighbourhood plan, should correct that issue in the neighbourhood plan. Now, we've worked through all of this process. The decision notice hasn't been issued yet. and that's for two reasons. First of all, because it took some time to negotiate and complete the Section 106 agreement, a little bit longer than normal, but nothing unusual in that. And then, to be candid, really because of the level of representation which we received around it, and we had to double check things and various steps have been taken to assess it. The position of officers, planners, myself as lawyer and legal colleagues is that that discrepancy does not preclude the council from issuing the decision notice. There is no conflict between the neighbourhood plan and the district plan, so that's the development plan as a whole, in that both allocate the site for housing. Moreover, the fact that the Craven district plan superseded the neighbourhood plan means that it takes priority, and there are no criteria attached to that allocation in terms of access arrangements. So we think that the council should issue the planning decision and is obliged to issue the planning decision. The second point about correcting this discrepancy, by which the parish council and others say that the neighbourhood plan should be changed and these criteria should be reattached to that allocation. That can't be done by North Yorkshire Council. The National Planning Policy Guidance provides mechanisms to change neighbourhood plans, and the only organisation or the only party that is able to change the Gargrave neighbourhood plan or to initiate that process is Gargrave Parish Council. Now, the County Council can support them in doing that and can facilitate it, but the County Council can't do it itself. I was, sounds defensive this because it sounds if I'm not confident of my own assessment, but senior officers asked for us to get a second opinion on this basically, so we went to a barrister and asked them to check those 2 points. We did that, somebody from King's Chambers, the Manchester set. We got their advice on Friday and they confirmed that our own assessment is correct. Therefore, what we propose to do is to issue the planning permission as per the recommendation, notwithstanding all of the activity in the meantime. If thereafter the parish council want to revisit the neighbourhood plan for whatever reason, then North Yorkshire Council can help them in doing that. I'm sorry if that's a rather long-winded explanation, but there's just been so much activity around it. We didn't want to issue that final decision notice until we'd had an opportunity just to identify these issues, because I'm sure there will be further representations and activity going forwards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thank you for that update on that site at Martin Road. I just want to be absolutely clear that within the Craven local plan, because that superseded and that's the one that carries weight.
Yes.
But the entrance to that site, did it show the entrance to that site when that land was allocated?
I don't think it specified any particular route into it. It was neutral. It just allocated the site for housing.
So it wasn't supporting the guardrail?
No.
Right. Well, I think you should get on and get it issued, because
well, we do have a duty to the applicant as well in these things, and that's that they've treated with us in good faith, been very patient. We've got a Section 106 agreement now. They're able to discharge all of the conditions. There's no reason why the decision shouldn't be issued. I just wanted, really, as a courtesy, as much as anything, just to bring it back to members.
So can I just make 2 points? Can you confirm that there's no suggestion whatsoever that members of the committee reached an incorrect decision or acted outside of their powers based on the information that was provided to us at those committee meetings on those days?
That's correct, I can provide that confirmation.
Okay. So we're satisfied that we've taken the correct decision based on the information provided to us?
Yes.
Okay. And then the comments you've made are just more for reference. You're not referring anything back to us?
No, it's just, I say, it's an update and a courtesy callback and an opportunity for members, because we have every expectation that there will be further representations and complaints following the issue of the decision, so I just wanted to flag it.
Appreciate the update.
Yeah. Could I, whilst you're updating on applications, what's happening with the sawmill down the same road? at Gargrave. Do you know anything about that?
I'm afraid I don't.
That was referred to the Secretary of State, was it, for the Environment Agency for flood.
I don't know what the progress has been on it.
No, because that is some considerable time since that was.
Could you get us an update for the next chair and vice chair's meeting so we can pass it on to members?
We'll do that.
Yeah, thank you. You know, we've got the government wanting to build, and yet they don't get on and say whether that decision was correct or not.
So if nobody has anything else that they'd like to raise, the date of the next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday the 6th of May 2025 at 1 p.m. The venue is to be confirmed. Thank you for everybody for attending and helping.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You've had an easy day.
I haven't.
You did very well.